Okay, Exodus 27, verse 1. And thou shalt make an altar of shittim wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad, and the altar shall be foursquare, and the height thereof shall be 3 cubits. And thou shalt make the horns of it upon the four corners thereof. His horns shall be of the same, and thou shalt overlay it with brass. Seems like a good place for us to begin with prayer. So, Lord, thank you for giving us this time to open in your word and to study and to just just to be able to see how these things apply to our lives as we look at Jesus in the midst of the tabernacle and the various furnishings. Anoint this evening and this gathering of us being together in your name. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, so picking up from chapter 26, we talked last time about the tabernacle coverings, and they were actually called curtains, but they were coverings that went over the tabernacle. There were boards that were placed into these sockets, and they went all the way around and created this wall. Except for the opening section, it created these walls, and they were covered in gold. And then they took the coverings over and placed them over the top. And the first was linen, and then the next was goat's hair, and the skin with the goat's hair on it, and then ram skins, and then badger skins. So it had 4 layers on the tabernacle itself, which had the most holy place, the center area, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was, and with the mercy seat and so on. And then you had the holy place, which was outside of that. It was 30 feet long by 15, and you walk on in. Well, the priest would walk on in, and then you had the Holy of Holies that they went into once a year. So, which was 15 feet cubed, basically, that area. So we're picking up on that. We had the tabernacle itself, and then the veil, which was in between the holy place and the most holy place, and then you had the door going into the front section, and the door was just another set of curtains. But as far as the name of it, it was distinct from the veil itself. So now we're talking about the altar of burnt offering, and it says in verse 1, we're going to look at a number of different additional furnishings here, but the next one here is in verse 1, thou shalt make an altar of shittim wood, 5 cubits, so 7.5 feet long by 7.5 feet broad, and the altar shall be foursquare. So it'll be equal on all sides, and the height will be 3 cubits. So that would be 4.5 feet tall. The literal meaning of altar is, in the Hebrew, sort of implies, or it speaks of it being a killing place, which is pretty gnarly when you think about it like that. It's a place where the killing occurs. And this is all outside on the approach going into where the tabernacle itself is. So we're going to talk a little bit about the courtyard, and then you come in through the gates of the courtyard, and then you're going to see this large altar, about a little over 7 feet square and 4.5 feet tall. And that's where the actual sacrifices would take place and then be burnt. And interestingly enough, the term Holocaust, of course, that's what, a 70-year-old term, but it actually has its roots in French, and holos literally means whole, and kostos means to be burnt completely. So this really speaks as well to the events that were taking place on this altar at this killing place, was that there was a complete burning occurring of the animal that was to be sacrificed. And of course, you can see the connotation with the Jews and their trial and struggle that they went through under Germany and the Nazi regime. So in Hebrews chapter 13, it says we have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat. So there's an altar, and those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat at it. Hey, good to see you. And so what this means is that you've got the priests themselves, and they take part in the service there at the altar, but they don't have any right to come to this particular tabernacle that that Jesus is all about. Of course, we're talking about the new tabernacle, or Jesus himself, and that's just personal, that it's not related to priests. It's a direct contact. It's something that we partake of Jesus as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, that we partake of him. And this is something that we do through communion, that in a unique way, when we partake of the bread, he said, "This is my body," and when we receive the cup, that this is my blood, and we're partaking of that sacrifice. There is no other priest, or there's no mediator there. It's just direct between the person who identifies with sacrifice and the sacrifice itself. So that's what it says in Hebrews 13, and that's how we kind of connect those two for us now, and for what was happening there at the tabernacle. So verse 2, it goes on, "And thou shalt make the horns of it upon the four corners thereof. His horns shall be of the same, and thou shalt overlay it with brass." So this altar is made of wood, of course, and then it's overlaid with brass. And as we've talked about, the meaning of brass, it's something that can be fired. It means judgment. Remember from last week, the bronze or brass, the actual meaning of that word in the original language doesn't have anything to do with bronze or brass. It actually has to do with copper. It means it's something that's made with copper. And you'll remember it has the connection to that of hissing, which is interesting because the mouth of an open snake, as it's hissing, you see the red there, and that's what the meaning is to the copper. That's the connection to it, that it's a place of being accursed. It's a place of burning. It's a place of judgment. And so this altar is completely overlaid with this bronze or with this brass. And then in the corners, it has these four horns. And the horns symbolize or represent strength. And, a connection to that having to do with Jesus is that Jesus is the horn of our salvation. We see that in Psalm 18 and also in Luke chapter 1. But it really emphasizes that altar isn't just a place where the sacrifice occurs, but that altar is representative of Jesus. It's speaking in terms of who he is, in his strength, in his power, but then the judgment coming down upon him, and that he's utterly consumed and burnt in that sense. So again, the consuming aspect as that related to Jesus directly is what was taking place with the trial and going through the cross and so on. So the horns represented strength. The four corners are interesting because the fact that there are four corners, when you see the number 4 used in the Bible, and especially going all the way back to Genesis, it has to do with the creation of the earth and directions. So the fact that this is that it has 4 sides is emphasizing that the judgment and the work that's occurring there is comprehensive for the entire world. It doesn't mean universally that everybody is saved. It means universally whosoever would believe wouldn't perish but have everlasting life. It's not just everybody's saved, but it has application to everybody who would believe, which of course that's quoting John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe wouldn't perish but have everlasting life. Now, if you notice here in verse 2, it says, "His horns shall be of the same. Thou shalt overlay it with brass." We see that phrase coming up just the one time here, but then in verse 3, we see it 6 more times. It's possessive. And with regard to it being possessive in verse 3, it talks about his pans and his ashes and his shovels and his basins, a total of 7 times, which shouldn't surprise us if we were to say how many times is it referenced in a possessive. Sure, number 7, because that comes in typically throughout the Bible as a completeness. The point being is, once again, that this altar represents Jesus Christ, and it's actually personally possessive. It's his horns as opposed to the horns of the altar and then trying to make a connection. And I think that that's really fascinating. It's almost as though it represents something that's living, even though it's a place of judgment. And we can go further with that with our own thoughts and the connections, but I think it's pretty fascinating. And then, of course, it's made of brass, which speaks of judgment. The sacrifice is killed, the blood is sprinkled for atonement upon each one of the horns, and then the body's burned and then consumed. And interestingly, in Numbers chapter 16, verse 40, it says, "The Lord has commanded the priests to take the bronze incense censers held by Korah and his followers, to hammer them flat, and to cover the altar of burnt offering with them, to be a memorial to the children of Israel." So what does that have to do with? What is that? You'll remember that the altar itself was made of wood, and then it was covered in bronze. It had the horns in the corner. But if you remember, in the book of Numbers, there was somebody that rose up against Moses and Aaron saying, "You take too much upon yourself. We should be helping you out." And there was a division that was occurring within the camp, basically, where some people were saying, "Hey, that makes sense. We're going to go with Korah," and other people were saying, "Well, no, we're going to stick with Moses." And remember, this was the time when the branch was brought forth, the staff of Aaron, and God said, God told Moses, this is how we're going to determine who God's with. And then Aaron's staff actually budded forth with almonds or almond blossoms. That in and of itself is fascinating because it speaks of the resurrection. You've got a dead old piece of wood that's budding forth with almonds, and it's showing that the life is with Aaron. Korah, of course, he and his family and those who followed didn't work out so well for them. The earth actually opened and swallowed them and then closed up on them. So that's kind of a tough way to go. But what they did, again, in Numbers, they said, "Take the bronze incense censers held by Korah and his followers and hammer them flat." So they took the things that Korah was using, they hammered them flat, and then they attached them to the altar. So it went from something that was otherwise smooth on the side. Now, every time somebody came to this altar, every time somebody saw the altar, it was lumpy on the side, and you could see the pounded down evidence of the censers and the basically the rebellion of Korah on the altar. So I think that that's pretty interesting and fascinating, again, from the standpoint of coming to the altar and understanding that rebellion, that there's no place for it, and that this altar resolves that. So again, moving on, we come to verse 3. "Thou shalt make pans, his pans, to receive his ashes, and his shovels, and his basins, and his flesh hooks, and his fire pans, all the vessels thereof thou shalt make of brass." So again, there are these instruments or articles that are used together with the altar itself. And these various things are, of course, they're all going to be made of brass as well. But the pans, these are specifically for receiving the ashes. So we're going to talk about a grate here in a little bit. But the altar itself, the way that it's made is you have the 4 corners, but then that's actually placed upon this grate that is box-like. So when you have the sacrifices that are on top of it, then they burn down. You have the wood, and then the sacrifice is placed upon it. They burn down, then you have the ashes that are underneath. So you have to have articles to move the sacrifice with, as well as being able to move the ashes from underneath that grate. They would end up taking the ashes, getting ahead of myself, but they would take those ashes and move them to the east side of that altar. So if you got sort of a picture, the entrance into the tabernacle courtyard is from the east. You're moving toward the west. So the first thing that you would see is the altar itself. And that's where the sacrifices would take place and so on. Up near, past that, you would see the tabernacle itself. And then in front of the tabernacle, you would have the laver, which is a wash basin. But then in between where that altar is and where the wash basin is where all the ashes would be kept for a time. And then afterward, they would take these ashes, they would change their clothing, they would take these ashes, go outside of the camp, and deposit them in a sacred place. But the point being is that it showed the total and utter destruction of the sacrifice that was on the altar. The ashes are taken and then taken outside of where the camp is. And so, of course, this is giving us a picture of what the destruction is based upon sin and so on, and how that is completely separated from the camp altogether. So this is our I would say, our outer darkness kind of perspective. At their time, there was Sheol or hell. When somebody died, then they actually went to the center of the earth, and there were two separations. There was one called paradise, which was also called Abraham's bosom. Jesus speaks of this. And then there was another place where there was torment. And that is what we generally regard as hell, being in the center of the earth. And yet later, there will be a resurrection that takes place where the dead are judged, and those whose names aren't found in the Lamb's Book of Life are in turn cast out into the outer darkness. So the idea, again, of the ashes being separated from the camp is a significant thing. And so we're seeing that idea played out on really a daily basis before them. So where are we here? We have the pans, and that's to move the ashes, and then it says his shovels, and that's for picking up the ashes themselves. And then his basins and his flesh hooks and his fire pans, all the vessels are to be made of brass. So again, keeping with the idea of fire and judgment, the connection back over to the brass. So the basins are for the blood, so they're going to sacrifice the animal, and when they sacrifice the animal, there's going to be a lot of blood, so they put that into the basins, and then they use that to consecrate or to place upon each of the horns and so on, and then to actually pour into that area where the fire is. And then the flesh hooks, that's to separate the portions. That's to move the sacrifice. So you've got this thing burning, this large animal that's burning, and you've got to be able to move this around. A portion of it is supposed to be set apart for the priest, which we'll get into when we get into Leviticus. But that's how they do it. They take these flesh hooks, and if you've got an ox or something, there's some work involved in moving this around and making those separations. And then they have the fire pans, which the fire pans evidently are used to transport the fire from the altar of incense. That when they're starting a fire, they don't, take Kingsford and light a match to do it that way. That they have the wood out, and then the sacrifice is there, and then they take the fire from the altar of incense, which is burning all the time, and then they bring that over, and then they would start the fire at the altar. Generally, that would be going all the time. In the temple, when it was later built, that fire just kept raging. It just kept going. And again, you've got the picture of hell and judgment that's continual. But when they had to move the tabernacle, then they had to, make certain provisions for how to deal with this, and that was what they did. They would have to, move the altar and then restart the fire. So they would use the fire pans for that, and you get that from Leviticus chapter 10 and 16, and also in 1 Kings. So we're going to talk now about the altar grate, and it's in verse 4. So we'll start, and thou shalt make for it a grate of network of brass, and upon the net shalt thou make 4 brazen rings in the 4 corners thereof, and thou shalt put it under the compass or the rim of the altar beneath, that the net may be thou in the midst of the altar. And thou shalt make staves for the altar, staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with brass. And the staves shall be put into the rings, and the staves shall be upon the 2 sides of the altar to bear it, hollow with boards. Shalt thou make it, as it was shown thee on the mount, so shall they make it. So there's this altar grate, as I was talking about earlier, that actually sits below, and that there are rings that are placed in that, and then you have the poles that are pushed through that, or the staves. Now the staves themselves, they're going to end up being covered in brass, as opposed to what you see in the holy place, in the Holy of Holies, where you have the staves into the rings, and those are all covered with gold. Of course, that's the Holy of Holies. This is representing judgment and sin, and it's outside of the holy place. That represents where God dwells. This represents where man is in making atonement. So it has the brass there, or the metal that has copper in it, with that red of the inside of the snake's mouth. So the hissing, you remember what I was talking about a little bit ago. So you recall from a couple weeks ago, we talked a little bit about the acacia wood, that the wood, the shittim wood, is actually known as acacia wood. Most of your translations have that, but it means flogging or scourging wood. So, and again, that's because of the thorns that are on it. So they would just say, hey, get some scourging wood over there, and they would know that's acacia wood, and that's what they were making these articles out of. In addition, and that's of course the connection back over to Jesus, that there was judgment and scourging and pain involved there. All right, so then they would take, remember the staves, they called them staves instead of poles, and that word in the Hebrew, remember what it was? Anyone? It was bod, or bad, and it meant something that was alone or separated from something else. And so we see the connection again, that something is separated or not with God, not in fellowship, is bad. So these poles are bad poles, or at least that's the word in the Hebrew, and it means separate, but it finds its purpose when they're actually placed within the rings on each of the instruments or each of the furnishings that it's intended for. And that's the bottom line there, is that it's finding purpose when it's together, when it's assembled. And so we see that, again, going back to Adam and his situation, until Eve was there, until that assembly had taken place, it wasn't complete. It wasn't as intended. It needed that to occur. So what else about the altar grate? Okay, so in verse 4, it talks about a grate of network of brass. So it's going to be a box that's grated, made out of brass, and then you have the walls of the altar itself that are placed upon that grate, and you've got the staves, so you pick up the whole thing as one. Now, the grate itself, the literal meaning of that grate is transaction. And that's fascinating, that in the Hebrew, the burning and the death and the atonement that's taking place upon the grate is actually, it's known there, that's the place of transaction. It isn't just a grate. It's not like looking at a Weber barbecue and saying, hey, there's the grate there, and then you throw something on it. This had more meaning to it, certainly. that there's a transaction that's occurring, that if there's sin, then there's consequence, and there's death, and that's where that transaction occurs, and then it means total destruction following through. So pretty fascinating. Again, I don't know if you're excited about this. I am. I think it's awesome to see all these different insights and so on. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the courtyard itself. The courtyard represents the place of the camp or the people. And so they entered into the courtyard and they met the Lord at the tabernacle. That was the tent of meeting. But the courtyard itself sort of represented the world or the nation of Israel. So you walk in there and then you're into the nation. That's the representation there. And so that was 150 feet by 75 feet, so rectangular. And verse 9, and thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle for the south side southward. There shall be hangings for the court of fine twined linen of 100 cubits, which is 150 feet long for one side, and 20 pillars thereof, and their 20 sockets shall be made of brass. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. So again, we see brass, which means judgment, but then we see silver there. You remember what silver meant from the sockets, that was one of the metals that was inside of the tabernacle. Those were the foundation that the boards or the planks were placed into. So you had the boards or the planks that were covered in gold, and then you had the literally the tenons that came out at the bottom. Now those tenons, you remember what they were called? They were called hands. The literal word in the Hebrew, yod. The hands were being placed. There was a spot within the socket for the hands to be placed and sort of like pierced into or placed into. And that those sockets were 100 pounds, and they were these big chunks of silver, and there was 2 for every board. And that the silver itself, what that meant or what that related to was redemption. And you pay silver to redeem, pieces of silver to redeem things. In fact, there was a half shekel, which was how each person redeemed themselves before the Lord. So the point being is, within the courtyard itself, you have the picture of judgment, but then you also have the picture of redemption. And of course, you can see that with Jesus, that the redemption is taking place through the judgment that he's bearing, and the two are one, or that they're connected with one another for the nation of Israel, or for anybody that would come into that court. So again, just some fascinating connections here. Verse 11, and likewise for the north side, the length there shall be hangings of 100 cubits, or 150 feet long, and his 20 pillars, and the 20 sockets of brass, and the hooks of pillars, and the fillets of silver. So there's brass and silver here, and specifically we see the silver is what's connecting it. You've got the hooks, but you've got the specifically the fillets of silver here. This is much like, you'll remember when they were laying the coverings on the temple itself, you had the sections that were held together with the silver. So it's almost like the covering that we have is based upon the redemption. I don't want to get too weird about this, but those connections to the silver always, they're connections, and that it's the redemption that we have in Jesus Christ that, that's the connecting aspect. That's what holds us together in him, is what he's done there. So, and you see that all throughout this tabernacle. So moving on to verse 12, and the breadth of the court on the west shall be hangings of 50 cubits, or 75 feet, and the pillars 10, and their sockets 10. And the breadth of the court on the east eastward shall be 50 cubits, and the hangings on one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, or 22.5 feet, and their pillars 3 and their sockets 3. And then the other side shall be hangings 15 cubits, their pillars 3 and their sockets 3. So what is this saying? On one side, on the north and the south side of the courtyard, it's 150 feet long. On the west side, it's going to be 75 feet. But then they say that there's two other sections which are 22.5 feet each. Why is that? Because in the middle is where the gate or the opening is to get into the tabernacle. So from the east, you come on through, and there's going to be a 30-foot opening there for the people of Israel to come into that tabernacle courtyard. So that's what that other section was about, it being on the east, that it's 15 cubits. You're talking about the corners. Okay. All right. What else about that? Got the hangings, 30-foot gate in between, and we'll get into that here shortly. So verse 16, and for the gate of the court shall be hanging 20 cubits or 30 feet of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen wrought with needlework, and their pillars shall be 4 and their sockets 4. So again, through that gate, good to see you. Through that gate area, that's 30 feet wide, and that's going to be gold. I'm sorry, it's going to be blue, purple, and scarlet, and then also the white linen. And there's going to be all sorts of embroidery work on that. So that's how you'll know you come to that. All the rest is covered in white linen that will later be covered from the outside with goat hair. So when you look at this, you're going to just see something that otherwise looks like black walls about 7.5 feet tall by 150 feet by 75 feet. It's not going to be that impressive. You'll see something there in the middle that is a little taller, but it's 15 feet tall versus the walls of the courtyard, which are 7.5 feet tall. You're going to see something in there, but remember, that's all covered with linen first, and then goat's hair, ram skins, and then badger skins or porpoise skins it could be. So that's what you see from the outside. Now the significance of that is when we look at our faith, when the world sees our faith from the outside, they see something that's, they're not seeing glorious cathedrals, they're seeing something that is rather plain. It's just like, what's the big deal about following Jesus? And more specifically, the fact that the tabernacle represents Jesus is something that when people look upon that, you're not going to be drawn to him because of his riches or his glory or because of his outward appearance. It's going to be based upon his word and what he understands and what he does. It's not going to be something that we look at him. So a good example of that is when we read of Jesus in the Gospels, people weren't following him because he was rich. They weren't following him because he was good looking. There was no reference to any of those things that we in this world look at for a reason to follow someone. That wasn't happening. But people were following him because he was not just a man of God, he was, the Son of God. And as they understood that, as he spoke and as the words came forward from him, then they knew that he was the Lord. But it was only based upon what he said. It wasn't based upon what the outward appearance is. So we certainly see that with the tabernacle. It's just a bunch of, goat hair and then badger skins on the outside and nothing fancy. So moving on, we come to, let's see. The length of the court shall be, well, is that where? Yeah, I guess this is where we're at. In the gate of the court shall be hangings of 20 cubits. Yeah, blue, purple, and scarlet, and fine twinings and needlework. And the pillars around shall be filleted with silver, and their hooks shall be of silver, and their sockets of brass. So again, we see the idea there of the hooks or the connectors being silver. And then, much like verse 10, I think. And then in verse 18, it says, the length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 cubits everywhere, and the height 5 cubits. So this is where we come up with our 7.5 feet tall. Just a little taller than most people. And you know something's going on the inside there, but you just don't quite know what's happening. And unless you're part of the children of Israel, then you can come in there. So the height of 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass, and all the vessels of the tabernacle, in all the service thereof, and all the pins thereof, and all the pins of the court shall be of brass. And then we come to verse 20, which is the candlestick oil, which is not much said at this point, but it is interesting. It says, thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring thee pure oil, olive beaten, for the light, to cause the lamp to burn always. So you have the lampstand, which is inside the most holy place on the left side, west side. No, I'm sorry, you're walking in from the east. This would be to the south side. And that has got to stay lit all the time. And of course, this is representative of Jesus, the light of the world. On the other side, you have the showbread, the table of showbread there, and which he's the bread of life. And then forward, which we'll get to in chapter 30, you have the altar of incense, which is aromatic, and it represents the prayers. Especially as we see later, as it's spoken of in the New Testament, it represents the prayers of the saints going up. So we come to verse 21. Last verse. And in the tabernacle of the congregation without or outside the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning before the Lord, and it shall be a statute forever unto their generations on behalf of the children of Israel. So again, talking about the tabernacle of the congregation. This is the tent of meeting. This isn't just a place like going to church and the church as being a building, but this is a place of meeting. It's a place of fellowship. It's a place of reconciling sin and being atoned for. And it's telling us here that on the outside of the veil, in the holy place, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning. So the fact that it says shall order it means to arrange, or literally to put these things in order. So their job is to serve that holy place from evening until morning, or evening to morning. So a whole day's time. It isn't just during the evening or just during the morning. They're ministering there. They're working in there and involved in and maintaining that holy place. Now, what is it that's keeping the most holy place lit up all the time? Now, no one sees this except once a year, right? The high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, but what's he going to see? He's going to see the Ark of the Covenant, and then he's going to see the mercy seat with the 2 cherubim. And incidentally, the I am is plural in Hebrew, so that you really should be 2 cherubs or the cherubim. And you're going to see that, and then above that is the Shekinah glory of God, the presence of God above the place of mercy where the angels are. So it's his throne, but that he dwells in that place. So that's what gives forth the light in that place. And even though they would only see it one time a year, and it would be the high priest who would do it, it was lit all the time. And it was always lit with the presence of God in that place. So can you imagine them attending to it? And if you just get maybe a little bit of a little crack at the bottom of the veil, and you see this light shining out from the Holy of Holies. just this little bit of, some evidence that there might be, that God is in there. It must have been amazing for the priests to go in there. I don't know if they had that opportunity very often, because it's his glory, but it would be a little bit like Moses seeing the backside of his glory. And, you're not seeing the direct glory, but you're seeing sort of a reflection off of the ground, perhaps under the veil. So they would serve there. And so what's our, I guess, conclusion here? That the fact that this tabernacle was a tent of meeting is telling us that when Jesus came, and just as this tabernacle was established for the nation of Israel to come into fellowship with God, that Jesus is the person that he's drawing us into the fellowship with God. And our job, I like this because I remember Pastor Chuck's son, when he was with Calvary Chapel, Capo Beach, their slogan at that church was putting people in touch with God. And that's really what we're supposed to be doing, is that we're making the introduction, we're making the invitation for people to come to know Jesus. We're working in unison with the Holy Spirit, whose job is to bring glory to God, to make that introduction and so on, that as we're walking in the Spirit, that's what we should be doing, is trying to put people in touch with Jesus Christ. And that relates to redemption and judgment. And once those things are taken care of, then especially through the once and for all death of Jesus Christ, that veil, we know, was torn from top to bottom, and now there's access for anybody who wants to come into the presence of God. And it's a pretty wonderful invitation that we can give to people, in addition to us taking advantage of. So it's probably a good place for us to pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for making that way for us. And we thank you, Lord, for the grace that you've shown to us through your work. It certainly is a gift. You've gifted us so abundantly. And we praise you, Lord, for the fact that we can be saved, and that it's all of your work that's taken place, and we just need to confess it or identify our lives with it, and believe that you were raised after 3 days. Just as Paul writes in Romans 10:9. We thank you, Lord, for the life that we have in you, and we do confess you as our Lord and Savior. We do believe that you're risen, and I pray, God, that we can be used by your Holy Spirit, by your purposes, to introduce people to you, that they would come to know you, Lord, that they would meet you, and that they would receive you as well. Lead us and direct us according to your power, and we bless you for this time of fellowship today together. In Jesus' name, amen.